Hello and welcome back to Coast FC, the Canadian soccer podcast focused on all things CPL, Canadian Championship, and more. My name is Felipe and Mike.
And I'm Mike Rice.
And today we have a very special episode because we have one of my favorite people in the CPL right now in terms of covering the CPL. You might know him by CPL By The Numbers on Twitter and now Blue Sky, but you might not know his real name. It's Alexander Brazier Rymek. How you doing, Alex?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here. My first podcast, so I'm a little hyper, a little excited, but thank you guys for inviting me.
No worries. Very happy to have you here for your very first podcast. Hopefully it's not your last, especially with all of the good work you do. For people that don't know, Alex, he loves to do a lot of CPL stats, and he has his own way of actually breaking down the statistics and sort of synthesizing them, and he makes little player cards and different kinds of player cards. It's very, very fascinating. I had a lot of fun going through his works in the last season or two. So we will go through some of the best players, some of the most underrated players. We have a fun list of players that we're going to look through in their stats and kind of elaborate on, giving our own thoughts from what we see with our own eyes. So a little bit of the eye test part, and also seeing how it compares to Alex's stats. But before we dive into all of that, we're also going to chat about some of the big CPL news that's happened in the last couple of weeks, because the CPL never sleeps. That's what we're learning. But before we dive into all of that, remember to follow us on all of our socials at Coast to Coast FC, as well as finding us on YouTube under the same name to see the visual side of the podcast. And I will give a little bit of a warning, because we have the player cards that Alex so graciously sent to us ahead of time. We're going to be putting that on to the screen. We will be spelling it out for the audio listeners. But if you do have the opportunity to see the visual side, I would highly recommend, so you can see the lovely cards that Alex has been able to create. But before we jump into everything that has to do with Alex, let's start with the CPL news. Because the CPL news had been let's just say a little bit of a roller coaster in the last week or so, especially to do with coaches. We saw two teams lose a coach and one of those teams gain a coach since the CPL final, which again was literally less than 2 weeks ago. Obviously, we talked about York United losing Benjamin Mora, the way that he sort of left a bitter taste in the mouths of not only York fans, but maybe CPL fans with the comments that he made. We also did talk a little bit about Atletico Ottawa and Cargo. Is he going to stay? Is he going to go? Especially after he made comments that he wasn't sure. Well, now we know that for Ottawa, and we'll start with Ottawa since Alex is from Ottawa and he's an Ottawa fan, that Carlos Gonzalez will not be returning as the Atletico Ottawa coach and has instead decided to move on to other things. They have parted ways, and now Atletico Ottawa are on the search for a new head coach. So maybe let's start with, are we surprised from Carlos Gonzalez? And yeah, I know, Mike, you're not very surprised, but I'll let Alex speak first about this. So, Alex, as a fan, I know that you have more stock in it, and so feel free to let your bias run through. This is we're not on like a sports channel or something like that where you have to maintain completely unbiased nature. Even on this show, we're a little biased, Mike, especially with Valor. So feel free to let your bias run through here. But were you surprised that Cargo decided to leave? And maybe even talking about if you weren't, why?
I don't think I was overly surprised. I mean, in his final press conference there, he was sort of equivocal about whether or not he was going to come back. He was talking about whether or not the club wanted him and having to go through that process. So in terms of that, it was sort of, it felt like it was coming. As a fan, I certainly wanted him gone. He did provide us with that regular season title in 2022, but the last couple of years kind of sucked. Having to watch defensive football wasn't the most entertaining thing in the world, and I know the casual fans that I brought to the games weren't overly excited either. They were asking why we were sitting back, why we weren't scoring goals. So as a fan, I'm happy, and honestly, that's what I wanted to happen. Even though he's a lovely person, I did want him to leave. And as a sort of neutral, I'm definitely not surprised either. I think you could see it coming from a mile away.
Yeah. I think both of us, especially I know Mike, you had your thoughts about it as well.
Yeah, I mean, like it's like the fans who were there and like the casual fans, like when you got all those signings that came in at the beginning of the season, you're thinking, okay, well, let's see if things change, given that opportunity. And we thought, like at the beginning of the year, it's like, well, this is his last chance. Like he's been given all the tools that I guess, I don't know if he so much claimed he couldn't be attacking because he didn't have, but he definitely could have maybe used that as an excuse last year, but he didn't have that excuse this year.
No, he really didn't. I think that was the thing, is that there was so much extra pressure. We talked about it before, about the fact that when you have, created this super team, right? And people were saying that it was basically like the Galacticos of the CPL because of all the players that were brought in. I mean, I'm sure the media and the fans did not help his cause whatsoever because of that pressure. But you got to play into it, obviously. When you have that kind of pressure, you are expected to perform even more. And I think as much as Carlos Gonzalez is a good coach, and you can see that he has successes in terms of obviously what he did in 2021 and what he's been able to do, in moments since, there was a really good run from Ottawa last season, about mid-season, where it looked like they actually might be threatening cavalry. That obviously tapered off with the whole tragedy in extra time at the end of last season. Even this season as well, it started off really well, but it was never consistent enough. And one of the stats that I actually learned from Capital City Supporters Group, which Alex contributes to regularly, is that Carlos Gonzalez's end of season record with Atletico Ottawa is actually quite poor. And I talked about this a little bit in a previous episode. But when you really deep dive into it, you're like, what happens with Ottawa? And I see, Alex, you're reacting quite strongly. So maybe you can share your thoughts. What happens with Carlos Gonzalez when he gets to the end of the season?
So I think part of it is he sort of loses the locker room a little bit. It seems to me that a lot of the players, weren't necessarily the happiest with the way he was playing and the style he sort of enforced, the defensive there. And I think, the grind of the season gets to you in the last 7 weeks or so, and you start to slip maybe, and you lose the locker room a little bit more. And yeah, that last end of season slip happened in all 3 years with Carlos Gonzalez. So clearly, if maybe we don't understand it properly, but there's something going on in the sense that sort of mentality they lose the mentality in the locker room. So for sure, it happened in 2022, although we still obviously retained the title. In 2023, it was just catastrophic. And in 2024, it happened actually more or so in the middle of the season. And you can actually attribute that slide to more of a change in structure. They started out the season playing very, very offensive. And I think they were unbeaten for 10 or so games. They were, I think, up 8 points on second place. And then he switched to a 5-3-2. And then immediately the results start tanking. I think he loses the locker room again, even worse than the first 2 times. And then at that point, it's sort of unrecoverable. You slip from first. I think we were in fourth at some point, and we got back to third. But yeah, something to do with Carlos Gonzalez's man management really, really was put to the test in the final sort of weeks of the season, and then of course in 2024.
It's tough, like looking back, and honestly didn't realize that Carlos Gonzalez is only 38? So he's a young coach, like who's come over, like so he's still learning. So like I've been quite harsh. So I want to be like in previous episodes. I want to like at least because the same way when you said that, it just reminds me of like Pacific when James Merriman, another young coach, beginning of the year goes well, a few things go wrong, and like it will lead on to other things, and obviously the York chat afterwards. But this is like a developmental league really for the coaches as well, for like quite a number of them. The young, like the very young in the beginnings of their careers, and who knows where he'll go on to next, whether he'll go back to Spain and continue to develop. But I guess that opportunity, he's, like you say, he struggled in parts, and getting them back on side, the man management part of it. Maybe he's come from a much more just coaching background, and I don't know too much about it previously before Ottawa. so he's had to learning on the job, really, I guess. He's had to do that, struggle a little bit. Maybe he hasn't had the right support in helping with that man management style and keeping players on board, but it'll be a big, like, it's a great opportunity for him and like other coaches coming into the league. You get that chance to actually coach it. And it's a head coach for 3 seasons, and he came in at 35 then. Like, it's such a young age. I mean, maybe Brighton in the Premier League and now taking the mick a little bit, but there are anomalies to this. But usually at 35 years old, you're still playing, or you're like, there's very few coaches that get that opportunity. So he's got a long way to go still in his career.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, this is probably the best time for him to leave. I think it's kind of, I mean, obviously hindsight's not is 2020. You could say that after 2021 or maybe even 2022, when his stock was a bit higher, that maybe was the best time to leave, to go on, move on to more things. Sort of in the same way that maybe we talked about Mauro maybe left when his stock was high after a short half season with York, so that he can, make sure that he can have those opportunities at other clubs. But even still, I think that Carlos Gonzalez leaves still on a relatively nice note because of what happened in 2021, because Ottawa were still, competitive and they looked like a good side at times. Obviously, it wasn't the season that they wanted in terms of how it ended, but still, I think he leaves, I can say, with his head held high on everything that he was able to do in 3 seasons at Atletico Ottawa, and he'll probably look for opportunities in Spain is what I imagine him going back to Spain there. But now the big question, obviously, is with him leaving, who will take the reins out of Ottawa? And I know it's kind of hard, especially in such a developmental league, to kind of actually throw names out there. So instead of like throwing random names out there, maybe we can talk about a certain profile of a coach that maybe Ottawa need, because we talked about, the fact that they were playing defensive football with such a super attacking team. So maybe they have to look for a coach that maybe isn't as defensive in terms of this tactics and is able to not only play good attacking football, but is able to accommodate so many good players into that style. Because that was the thing that we talked about as well, Mike, in terms of how difficult it is to be able to fit so many of these pieces that are used to being, the heroes, the star players, into a star team without people overshining others or butting heads and stuff like that. I mean, we're going to talk about Ollie Bassett in a little bit, but Ollie Bassett was one that we saw that I think suffered a bit from this, as well as from being, Mr. Ottawa Hollywood, to being pretty much kind of faded into the background at parts of this season. So, Michael, I'll start with you. What kind of profile do you think that Ottawa need for a coach moving forward, so they can actually reach those heights that they want to?
Yeah, I think they've got the from the outside looking in, they've got their structure. They want to be defensively solid, but it needs to be someone who's going to sort of take that and look to dominate games a little bit better and not rely so much on counter-attacking football. I imagine that the way the ownership works, it will be someone else possibly coming across again, and given that opportunity to maybe one of these academy coaches who are working their way up, to give them that opportunity to manage in a sort of professional environment and give them that opportunity to go. But it will be looking at someone, listening to Alex there, it's going to be someone who they will look at who's maybe a better man manager and knows how to deal with sort of the off the field parts of the role a little bit better and is maybe more prepared for those.
Yeah, and Alex, obviously as a fan, you have a better insight into what kind of manager you want, especially not just maybe on the field tactics, but also in terms of personality and stuff like that. So for you, what do you think?
I definitely think I'm in line with the rest of the fan base in that we really want more attacking football. There was a big discussion on the CCSG Discord server, I think it was yesterday, about the various candidates that we were just throwing out there, and a lot of the focus was on attacking football. So I think, besides what we want, I think it's what the city of Ottawa needs in terms of their football scene. The defensive football does nothing to attract the casual. So if the club takes that into account, they will definitely try and look for that type of vein of style. I definitely think management should be a priority. The stories I've heard out of the locker room aren't necessarily the healthiest.
Mm.
So and that along with that end of season slide is indicative of something. So attacking football, man management, and if they do go for an academy coach, I'm not sure how well people will like it. We've had sort of two young Spanish managers being come out from the Atleti system, and aside from 2022, they haven't really worked out very well. I don't know how well they'd be received for the fans or by the fans. So I would almost want maybe someone who isn't a Spanish young academy coach, but I don't make decisions, so I take what I can get.
No, yeah, that's very fair, and it is a good point, right? And I think it's a tough one because these are you have advantages and you also have some drawbacks by being affiliated with one of the biggest clubs in the world, right? With Atletico Madrid and that Atletico family of that, you have that sort of power and that pulling power behind you, and it's helped a lot. But at the same time, it's they kind of dictate a little bit about what goes on at the club, and if they want to use it as where to send these academy players that maybe aren't cut out to play in the top 2 or 3 Spanish divisions and go see how they can grow there, and same with the coaches, then that's you're kind of stuck in this kind of framework where you're kind of seen as this kind of maybe not a feeder club, but maybe as like just this affiliated club that helps you develop in other ways. So we'll see. I think that I would be happy to see a different kind of coach come in. I think it probably will be another Spanish coach, just thinking about how Atletico Ottawa is. But I would love if they switched it up and brought in a coach that is a bit more forward thinking, especially in terms of the attack. I mean, if we can have somebody, I know they have a great season, but somebody along the likes of like Patrice Geyser, who brings really fluid, good attacking football into the league, but is also a good man manager as well. I think that'll be probably maybe best case scenario for Atletico Ottawa, and I'm sure that we'll keep our ears to the ground to see what news comes out of there. I'm sure it won't be too long before we see who the Ottawa successor is, but we do know who the York United successor is, and that is somebody very close to home. Against I was just talking about what happens when you have an identity affiliated to your club. York United went against that because instead of another Mexican coach coming into the York side that is newly owned by Mexican owners, it's actually a Canadian-Portuguese coach that CPL fans you will know very well. It's Mauro Eustaquio, the older brother of Canadian men's national team, and I think he was captain a few times, but I don't think he's the captain now. Steven Eustaquio, the FC Porto man. He had, I believe, 2 or 3 games as interim coach in between Mora and Martin Nash, but he seems to have won the owners over with either those games or his role as an assistant beforehand or through the interviews, and got given the reins for 2025 as the York United manager. And I think I've seen a lot of good points on his appointment. A lot of people are very happy because obviously he's local, he's Canadian, he's so young. He becomes the youngest CPL coach at only 31. Pretty sure the youngest professional coach in North America at 31 years old. I think I saw that stat from the league. And so it's obviously a fantastic opportunity for him, and a lot of people are happy for him. But I've also seen some points that it's a little bit of a disappointing appointment because it kind of feels maybe like a little bit of a step back into maybe the Martin Nash mold and not a step forward, trying to be more ambitious from bringing in a coach in like Benjamin Mora, especially since with Eustaquio was the assistant coach under Nash. He was also, obviously part of the coaching staff with Mora, but like, is he going to go back to how they were under Nash? Is he going to be able to improve on that? Is he going to do something different for Mora and Nash? These are a lot of questions that I was seeing people mention in forums across the various social medias and things like that. So I think it's going to be an interesting decision, and the reception is going to be interesting for probably weeks on out. But Mike, we'll start with you. What did you make of this kind of appointment?
I'm quite excited for it. I mean, we've seen James Merriman. I'll bring him up again. We saw him get his chances with Pacific after sort of starting as an assistant there and worked his way up. I think what's important to remember about Eustaquio is it's not just that he's come from Martin Nash and Benjamin Mauro. He's also been up there with the Canadian men's national team, working alongside their coaches. It sounds like he's someone who's working really hard to develop himself and like work out his identity as a coach and the sort of philosophy he wants to bring. So I think he sounds quite interesting, quite exciting. And this is the league to do it. Like when you've got someone like that who's obviously got a rapport with the team, that he's built up he built up a big enough imprint on Benjamin Mauro and the staff and the owners at York that wanted to keep him on after Martin Nash's firing. Knowing that they've got something in this person, it's a great chance for him to go out and really give it a shot. Like, this is what the league is. We praise it for being like a developmental league, and we get these young players in who are given the chance to shine. Yeah, it's exciting to see a coach do it. I mean, I don't support the team, so it's great because I can be a neutral guy, like, and I can see it for all the positives. There is always that worry, like, they're new to the job. It's like, and it's their first full hire as a coach as a head coach, at a young age. But it sounds like he's got a lot of hunger for it. It sounds like he's creating his path and learning a lot as he goes. Yeah, really keen to see what happens with this.
Yeah, I think with Eustaquio, it's sort of like you mentioned there. I mean, this is sort of what the league is here for in terms of development, and that includes, you know, with coaching. And he does seem keen, and like from what I've seen from his interviews and what I've seen from him talking about it, he's somebody that takes this very seriously. He's very ambitious. You know, I don't think that people are necessarily saying like he doesn't deserve it or whatever. I think that it's a good appointment, and I'm happy for him. And as somebody that wants to support, you know, Canadian soccer growth, both players and coaches and everybody everywhere, it's good. But yeah, at the same time, there's also maybe that little bit of a part of me that was like hoping for a more of an exciting name coming into York United because of the new owners, because of the direction that they took with Benjamin Moore. And I was expecting somebody along those lines to maybe come in and kind of.
How much his comments maybe put off a couple of people.
That's true. Yeah, no, that's true. Well,
outside
maybe
of Canada.
that's the thing. They talked about a global search and everything, and then it looks a little funny when you do a global search and then you promote your assistant coach.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a weird one. Alex, I'll go to you to see what your thoughts are on this appointment, and if anybody's a little confused why we can't see Alex's face. Alex had a little bit of a mishap with his webcam. Webcam decided to just take a nap at this particular time and doesn't want to wake back up. But yeah, I went on break. But Alex, for you, are you happy? You know, I was trying to think as a neutral. If you were or maybe even if you were a York United fan, if you can imagine that for a second, would you be happy with this appointment? Or were you maybe with some of the other people that were expecting a bit of a bigger name?
I'm not sure if I would have been expecting a bigger name. I mean, at this level, any sort of new name, foreign name, if you will, is exciting because you don't really know what you're going to get. I'd be more worried about promoting an assistant coach. I hope I'm not rehashing anything that you guys said while I was dealing with my issues. But an assistant coach, it's really hard to say if they're going to continue the same system, if they have their own vision. They are sort of by nature implicated in any of the failings of the previous coach. And so you have that. I'm thinking of like vice presidents becoming presidents. So I'd be more worried about that in the sense that it's nothing that, as far as I know, it would be nothing completely new and fresh. And some of the things that York has had struggles with recently might come back again next year with Eustaquio as coach. So I think I'd be more worried about or apprehensive, let's say, about promoting an assistant coach versus a totally new hire who might bring a fresh system, fresh way of doing things, fresh everything to the club.
Yeah. I get what you mean there completely. I guess, like, to play devil's advocate, I guess maybe confirming it now gives him quite a while to start getting like his footprint on the whole thing, rather than when it's done quickly and it's okay, mid-season, sack the manager, you can take over for the rest of the year. Then yeah, it might not see much of a change, but now he's got his chance and he's got 3 or 4 months to get set, organize what players he wants to keep, what players he wants to bring in, and maybe doing it quickly could benefit him and benefit him to change things and to make it his own. But yeah, I mean, time will tell. It could just it could, like you say, it could just follow some of the similar paths of last year.
Yeah. And that was my concern as well, is like, you're right, Alex, and it's kind of hard to separate, an assistant from what the main manager did. And I think that's sort of maybe something that he has to deal with in at least the opening stages of next season, and throughout this preseason, of like trying to separate himself from what happened under Martin Nash and try to prove that he is a step forward. He is something fresh and new, and not going back to how York United were at the end of the Nash era before the new owners came in. I think that's going to be probably his biggest pressure going forward, especially because of how well Benjamin Mora did in the short time that he was there. He kind of raised the standard at York United, broke a bunch of records and set new highs. Now it's on him to try to keep that standard going, even though he is sort of connected to the era from before.
I'm on board with all that, but I'm also very much keen on the chaos and nonsense that went along with a lot of York United. As a complete outsider and somebody does a podcast, they were good content for a while. So if I can get a bit more of that back.
Yeah, they were very, very entertaining. That is very true. Very, very true. But yeah, we'll keep an eye out on what happens with Eustaquio, and the moves that might be going on. We'll obviously do probably an episode on New York United as well as Ottawa on their post-mortem very soon after this episode is done. But let's move on to now the actual meat and potatoes of this episode, which is talking about Alex and his stats on the CPL. So, Alex, I'm very, this is also just a personal thing, but I'm sure the listeners will be, keen to hear as well. But I'm very curious to see why you began doing this. What was it about analytics and going to stats that made you want to, do it for the CPL? And yeah, feel free to talk about yourself, your history a little bit, why you started, and then we'll go into how you actually go about doing your stats.
Well, if I really want to pinpoint the time where I really got into stats, it was when I was playing FIFA and the career mode doesn't track stats from season to season, which really annoyed me. So I started recording stats on my own in my own spreadsheets, season to season, the goals, assists, whatever. I wanted to see the best players from my career mode. And then I when I got into hockey, there's a lot of advanced analytics in hockey and more so in baseball, but in hockey, there's a lot of graphs and you see people like Jay Fresh and Micah Blake McCurdy doing analytics for hockey. And it's slightly different, but I figured, hey, I like spreadsheets. I like advanced analytics, and the CPL starting up. Why don't I try and sort of do stuff mostly for my own personal use? It started out like that. So, and it really, before, I think it was 2023, the CPL had Center Circle Stats, which was a free to access, open source spreadsheet with a whole bunch of different statistics per game and per season. So it's really like a whole bunch of information. You could just like go around and play in like a sandbox. And I was like, hey, look at all this data I can use. And I started out nice and slow, I think in 2021. And then it just sort of grew from there. And at some point I realized, hey, this might be able to be published, and let's see where this goes by posting my stats on Twitter. And then eventually grew to here. I do articles from other sources, use my stats, and you guys invited me onto the podcast. So it sort of grew naturally until here we are now.
Amazing. A man after my own heart, because I'm with you there with the FIFA stuff. I also am like that with FIFA, especially when I do like MLS saves. I try to follow the rules. So I have like a huge Excel spreadsheet about the roster rules and the salaries and everything. I'm
Mhm.
very much on the same page there. Uh, but yeah, awesome to hear a little bit more about how you got into this. But let's move on now to talking to you, the actual stats themselves. So I'm going to put up on the screen one of your cards that you make for players. Now, this one is specifically of Ollie Bassett because we're going to talk a little bit about Ollie Bassett through the explanations that you have as well. So here you have your sort of player card, and this one is the one if that is for a season. So just for the audio listeners to describe what the player card looks like. So it has the name, a photo of the player, so Ollie Bassett with a photo of Ollie Bassett. It has his number, the club badge that he has, the nationality, his position, his age, the basic stats. It has how many games he played, how many minutes total he played, how many 90s he actually played to the decimal. And then you have your actual sort of proper stats. So you have your total one, which I would love for you to elaborate how you got to creating this, which is your adjusted weighted percentile average, which in my head is like this is your total score of the season. And you have that one like as the biggest one there. Underneath it, you have its positional rank, so where the player actually fits in terms of ranking in his position, his ranking in terms of all of the players in the CPL, the team factor that contributed to it, and then you have a little, I think it's a radar graph with the stats, and on the right hand side you have all of the key stats there. So that's what a player card looks like. Again, if you're a little confused, feel free to either watch the visual side of this episode or go on Alex's social media so you can see all of the player cards because he does post it on his social media there. But how about you break down this player card for us and sort of explain how you get these values, how you create them, how you synthesize them, and put it on a card.
So I'll start counterintuitively on the right. So those 12 boxes are some of the stats, individual stats and aggregated stats, which means some of them, like ball distribution, are like all the passing stats combined. So essentially, those numbers mean he is better than, for example, 85.7% of the league in passing stats. And what I did was I just took those 4 passing stats, I weighted them slightly, and then presented and ranked them again. So those numbers are how much better he is than the league at whatever the statistic is. Blue, for those listening, I've color coded them as well. So blue is better, orange is worse. And 50 is the average. So 50, you are better than only 50% of the population. Moving to the left, we have the radar chart or spider graph, or however one you want to call it. I took, I think, 7 of them, and the area of the under the radar chart shows you which of those key metrics he's excelling in, and the area will kind of move around depending on how good you are in different areas. So the center attacking mids usually look something like this. A lot of the area is shifted to the right because that's more attacking metrics. If you're a center back, it's kind of the opposite. You'll get bottom left area. Anyway, that's more visual representation. It's not that precise because it's sort of extra detail. And then on further to the left there, you said that the big number is kind of like a grade, and it works kind of like a player rating on FootMob or SofaScore or something. You post these graphics on Twitter that says this player got a 7. He must be a good player. I try to avoid that. The number itself is not gospel. It's not, it is not the be all and end all. You obviously have to use your own thinking. You have to watch the games to understand really how good the player is. But that grade is essentially all the stats on the right, sort of weighted based on the position you play in. So, for example, a center attacking mid, right? On the field, you want to be creating chances. You want to have assists. You want to be a decent passer. You want to be involved. And then your defensive stats don't necessarily matter that much. So the weighting, it reflects the role you have on the field. and allows your strengths as a center attacking mid to shine through in that grade. So his goals and assists matter a lot more than his defending stats, because he's really not going to be there when the team is defending, and also he's probably not going to be very good at it. So that grade, it's adjusted and it's been weighted based on his position, and a few more modifications based on the minutes played, and just to make sure that the positions all sort of come out the same. And generally speaking, a 65 is pretty good. A 75 is very good, and an 85 is excellent, top tier. And there won't be any 100s, because you can't be a perfect player. And I made that decision. Some advanced analytics don't have that. They go up to 100. I prefer not going there, because it sort of also implies your model is perfect. And obviously mine isn't. It's a Google sheet, so it can't be perfect. Finally, on the bottom there, like you said, the positional rank, he's the second best center attacking mid out of 8 in the league. The rank, he's 39th best out of 169 total players. And the team factor there, it's sort of it takes into account the team's overall grades versus their position in the league. Some people like to say that how well your team played with you determines how good you are as a player. So if you value the team's effort, the team's results over a season, you can sort of add that score to the grade, and that sort of boosts or diminishes depending on how well your team played. And I don't necessarily agree with that necessarily, but some people like it, so I included there anyways.
Makes sense. Yeah, and like you can see from Ollie Bassett, I think he's a great example of what you were talking about, because he has a, adjusted weighted percentile average of 74.4, so it's quite good. And you look at his like the big stats that he has. No surprise that he's in the 95th.8 percentile of players with key passes, and 85.7 in ball distribution, 86.3 in touches, 93.5 in tackles and interceptions is an interesting one, considering that he is an attacking midfielder. Mm-hmm. That one jumped out at me. But yeah, you can sort of see what you were talking about there, about how you sort of weigh everything depending on the position that you have. Now, Mike, now that you understand a little bit more about what these numbers mean, are you surprised by seeing Ollie Bassett's maybe weighted percentile average being this high, given how maybe we were talking a little bit about how quiet he was throughout the season?
Yeah, in some ways, yeah, but like the explanation of what everything goes and seeing like the actual card with like the what you just mentioned there, 93.5 on tackles and interceptions, when he does massively highlight the different role he had this year. And what he was expected to do, and the movements. He wasn't just that. The team were slightly different, like the way they were set out. It wasn't just all sit back throughout the whole year and like leave Ollie Bassett and insert your striker here and see if anyone could catch up with them as they counter-attacked. Like he's actually he was put out on the right. He was moved a little bit. Mm-hmm. So you got to see a little bit more of. You can identify, you can see, yeah, like key passes are high, but yeah, he was doing a lot of other stuff which maybe took away from the eye and those not looking at the stats throughout the games and checking on the player, and maybe not watching the games as much as you, Alex. I mean, it's a bit harder for me when it's if they're playing away in Pacific on a late night game and with the time difference here. But there's definitely bits that we've missed of Ollie Bassett in this new system. And I guess it would be quite interesting to see how his card changes over the last sort of 2-3 seasons, like with the way the team's played as well.
Well, lucky for you, we do have that actual card because Alex was nice enough to also give us his sort of career.
That wasn't even
It's almost as if it was scripted, but it was not. His career card, looking over how he's done since 2021 when he came in to Ottawa. And you can sort of see that obviously 2021, because of the season that it was for Ottawa, he got his best score of 81.9. His worst was in 2023, 66.8. 2022 was slightly better than this year with 77.4. Obviously, this year was 74.2. So, Alex, when you create a career sort of card like this for Ollie Bassett, what is it that makes it a little bit different, and what changes from when you make just a single season card for a player?
So the main thing there is the grade on the left is all of the seasons he's played, but weighted specifically like the share of minutes he plays in each season. If you played really well, or statistically really well, but for 200 minutes versus playing poorly for 2,000, your 2,000 minute season should weight a little bit more. So I did that change. And what's interesting to note there is that the more he plays, actually, the worse he gets. So 2021 actually was his first season with Pacific, where he played off the bench. He won it was the North Star Cup, I think it's called now. He won the playoffs with Pacific, but he didn't play that much. And then he comes to Ottawa. He does really well in more minutes. And then 2023, obviously the team was a lot poorer, but again, he was playing more. He's playing more. He became a focal point, and you can see his grade side taper off. So if you really want to buy into the statistics, which you shouldn't, this is not perfect. It's not, like I said, it's not gospel. You shouldn't just look at the stats and say, wow, he was a 75% good player, something like that. You need to keep into account the way the team played and the factors around the way he plays and his importance to the system. But if I was looking at this, I would say the more he becomes the focal point of a team, the more pressure is on him. Maybe he becomes less and less effective. So that's how you can see the grade sort of go downwards. And I don't know if that's 100% accurate. Maybe someone who doesn't look at the stats might have a different opinion, but if I look at the stats like this, maybe that's what I think.
There's something on that. I don't know what you guys think, but it does remind me when I look back, and think about where I've only watched him as eye test. Later on in games, he comes off even in 90-minute matches by the 75th minute. If he's been dominant, if he's been really involved in that game, then he tapers off during game from memory. It does, in my mind, that does bring up those moments where he is getting subbed off later on in games, or he's not really having much of an influence later on in matches as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think you make a great point there, Alex, which I think a lot of people that are in stats and like sports stats and analytics, especially in football, because it's become so much more popular in recent times. You make a great point of, this is not the end all be all. This is not gospel. The stats might say one thing, but the eye test is also important, and you have to have a more holistic view, a balanced view of everything. Because I think that's often a charge that's given towards people that are very stats heavy, that stats are ruining the game, and because they don't align with what people see. But for me, I always see it as like it just adds more to fill your kind of perspective, to make it more holistic of of a player or a game or a season or a team or whatever. And it's interesting because in this case, the stats that you have that point to 2023 being his worst season. But I remember talking with Mike, with yourself, that last year he was the top goal scorer and was probably the most influential player that Ottawa had, despite having a disappointing season. So if you were to ask me before looking at the stats, what would have been his worst season compared to his best season, I would have probably put 2023 higher than maybe 2022 or even this season. I would have probably maybe put this season as his lowest season. So it is interesting to see how it compares and contrasts the stats to the eye test and to the perspective of whoever's watching. And it kind of goes to show that, one is not really complete without the other. And you kind of have to use both to get the best sort of, insight into whatever you're looking at. And I think Bassett is a great example. And one of the reasons why, obviously, we bring up Bassett is because, unfortunately for Ottawa fans, and I'm sure Alex, it's come to an end, the relationship between Ollie Bassett and Atletico Ottawa. It is no longer Hollywood because he has moved on. The rumor is that he has gone to the USL and that he has gone to Tampa Bay Rowdies, according to sources like Northern Tribune and From Away's Halifax. So we'll see if that materializes. But Ollie Bassett, I mean, what a player. I think we can safely say, regardless of, I think both on the stats and both on the eye test, it's safe to say that he was a fantastic player for Ottawa and a fantastic player to have in the CPL. And yeah, I think he will be sorely missed going into 2025. But this is what happens, players come and players go in the CPL. But that was an example of the sort of way that Alex goes about creating his cards and explanation. Now let's actually go into some of maybe the kind of different types of players and how well they did in this 2024 season. So let's start off with the best performers. So I will quickly just go through the list of all the best performers, and then maybe we'll pick a couple going through the cards to quickly discuss before we move on to some of the other lists, because we are going to talk about some of the best performers, the most consistent performers in the last few years, the most underrated performers, and the breakout stars from this season, and maybe compare them to a couple of breakout stars from previous seasons as well. But let's start off with the best performers. So this one, easy peasy, Alex. This is just the players that have the highest adjusted weighted percentile average in the entire league, regardless of position and everything. This is just the number one ranked, or the number 1 to 5 ranked players in the league.
Yeah. So starting out, obviously, Tobias Warszeski, Golden Boot winner. Not a surprise, honestly. He was completely dominant, returning to the CPL after a year off, and he just did everything a striker needed to do. Scored goals, he was getting those shots on target in volumes, the best at score goals and the best at shot attempts. And more importantly, which I think boosts his score above other strikers, maybe say like a Ruben Del Campo, who was second in the Golden Boot, but Warszeski really could provide for his team. He had a decent amount of chance creation. He had an okay pass percentage for a striker. He drew lots of fouls, which is a big important if you're drawing fouls high up the field, right? That's important as a striker. And he also could beat his man. So 1v1 percentage there. Not a lot of strikers can do that. So he could create for himself. He could create for his team. And of course, given service, he could score lots of goals. So that's why he ranks number 1.
Yeah. I mean, not surprising, Mike. We talked about how
love him.
influential he was for Cavalry. We absolutely adored him. The fact that we talked about how he was creative and how he loved to just run around all different parts of the pitch. Even though sometimes I wish he would just stay as striker. But he can set them up. He can score them themselves. We've waxed lyrical about him, especially last episode when we were doing the review of the CPL awards. But the fun one I see right there is the foul differential. So he has a 96.4 in foul differential. So I'm assuming one of the best, the very best in the league. But what does that mean necessarily, foul differential?
So what I've done there is I've taken the fouls he drew and subtracted them by the fouls he created or committed. So a positive number means he's drawing more fouls than he is receiving. And I found that he has a foul differential of 1.7 per 90. So that means he's drawing approximately 1 and let's say 3/4 of foul, or almost 2, let's say 2. He's drawing 2 more fouls in a full game of 90 minutes than he is committing. That is really, really good. It's not the best in the league. And I think in my fun stats, I do have one about the foul differential. There's some ridiculous numbers there. The wingers mostly, because they're beating their fullback and the fullback's panicking and making a tackle. So the wingers have a big sort of jump in the foul differential stat specifically. But a striker being this high is really, really good. Like I said, drawing those fouls high up the field, very, very crucial to setting up sort of a good set piece, maybe around the 18 or even a penalty.
Yeah. I mean, the way that he beat players, like it wasn't like he was just flying past like a winger. Like he was being aggressive going in. I mean, those four
barreling past
them. Probably still having nightmares. And it was the point that it was just like, we're gonna have to bring you down because you're too I can't tackle you, and you're running at me with the ball rather than around me.
Like a steam train. Yeah, no, I would not want to be a defender there. No surprise, and that he's the number 1 given everything that he's been able to do for Calgary this season. a surprise one, in second compared to, because everyone has their own opinions, and look, we talked about the eye test for the stats. A lot of people might expect like a Tristan Borges or a Kyle Becker or a Harjaprapur or an Ali Musi or something like that to be second. And I know that they are quite high, but in second, actually, for the visual viewers that can't see, it's actually Amir Didic to be second with 84.9 in the adjusted weighted percentile average. Now, obviously, looking at his stats on the right-hand side, the 1v1 percentage, the aerial percentage in duels pops out. I mean, the 99.4 in aerial percentage in duels is ridiculous. 97.6 in blocks and clearances. So maybe, for the people that maybe are a little surprised, Alex, maybe you can explain why Didic did so well, especially since you're a fan of Ottawa, did so well despite maybe not appearing that way because of the way that Ottawa maybe didn't impress as a whole throughout the season.
Well, to be honest with you, I think the only reason it's a surprise is because people overlook defenders. I'm a defender myself, so I'm a big proponent of recognizing those strong defenders. And Didic, honestly, if you look at his career, in my model, he ranks as the best player in the Premier League ever. He's almost always in the top 3, top 1 of players in the season, and he's just an absolute monster. So when you're watching him play, he's just winning duels. He's clearing the ball. He's throwing himself in front of shots. Right? He's doing everything a real center back needs to do, and he's also, he's got good passing numbers, so he's not giving up the ball in stupid areas, and he can score from the corners. He's a big, tall presence, and sometimes it gets overlooked, but like fundamentally, he is an excellent center back. I loved him, and I'm happy to see that at least statistically he gets recognized. Frankly, the fact that he wasn't in the team this season is an absolute robbery. I will never get over that. Disgusting. It's rigged. It's rigged. So yeah, I just
like Carlos Gonzalez now.
sorry. I'll tone it down a little bit. I just think, for me, when I look at the statistics, because I've got all the seasons, him being this high is no surprise. It's actually a dip in his performance statistically.
Oh wow.
He might be getting a little up there in age, but yeah, he was still one of the best players in the league, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I mean, for sure. I think that defensively, there are few better than Amir Didic, pound for pound in the CPL, and that's been the case for the last few seasons. And then clearly the stats back it up. I think that, I mean, probably a big reason why Ottawa were where they were anyways in the first place is because of how strong the defense was, and Didic was a huge part of it, and also how massive he is. He's always going to be dangerous, either from set pieces defensively or offensively. So yeah, a fantastic player to have in the league. And like I said, maybe you're right in that there's a little bit of bias towards the more attacking players that people are surprised to see him second, because he is ahead of the we'll do third and fourth place very quickly because they're kind of expected. In third place, we have Ali Musi with 84.5. He's one of the top players in goals and assists, 94, key passes with 98.2, and obviously foul differential. He's a player that loves to draw fouls with 83.3. What's really interesting about him, though, Alex, is that he did so well to be ranked third with relatively few minutes under his belt. Yeah,
so that's one of the things I think I might have forgotten to mention is that the fewer minutes you play lead to a lot of extremes, right? If you accidentally make a tackle in 1 minute of game time, you're gonna get 90 tackles, right? And that's gonna be far and away the best ranking in the league. But obviously, we have no idea if you can continue that over a larger sample size. So 1,300 minutes, I think, is only slightly above the average amount of minutes. I think it was 1,200 this season. So yeah, he has a relatively small sample size compared to the rest of the league. So, when you're looking at it holistically, you say, well, maybe he wasn't the third best player in the league, but in the minutes he played, and that's a crucial sort of asterisk you put there, in the minutes he played, he was extremely well. He played extremely well. So yeah, like I said, the goals there, the passes, that's just all you need as a winger, frankly. The crosses as well. I think he completed a little over a third of his crosses, which for this type of league is pretty good. And The foul differential, like you mentioned, is pretty good. The 1v1 percentage, maybe not the strongest, but all in all, in the few minutes he played on either side of his injury, he was very, very effective, and he terrorized Atletico Ottawa, more importantly. So, yeah, absolute monster.
Yeah, that for sure he did, like many other teams. And I mean, it isn't that surprising in a sense where, yeah, like a Cavalry looked completely different when Ali Musi came back in August. It was, yeah, you could see that the tide turned completely into their favor as soon as he came back into the squad. So no surprise that, I guess, if you look at his impact and how much he impacted Cavalry on their run to winning the North Star Cup, you can sort of say maybe that it is valid that he is third place overall. Though, yeah, that 1v1 percentage is actually quite low because I always thought of Ali Musi as a good 1v1 winger, but maybe that's something that's this season, maybe because of injury or whatever, he wasn't able to fulfill in terms of what maybe expectation is.
I guess also you need 3 men covering Wojciechowski, so he had more time to just cut inside.
That's true. That's true. Maybe he just had less 1v1s to do because of Toby. That's very true. And then in fourth place, we have the Player of the Year that was voted in. Tristan Borges, who is my pick, who, no surprise, the Player of the Year is probably going to be in the top 5 there. 98.2 in goals and assists, 85.7 in shooting, 95.2 in key passes. Even his ball distribution of 57.1, maybe a little bit low. Foul differential 74.4, still pretty good. Alex, do you think that based on these stats, it was a worthy winner of the Player of the Year award?
I think so. I can't, obviously, like I said, this is not reality. It's just not gospel. I can't think of another word, but it's not perfect. So yes, an MVP winner in the top 5 is like, and they're good. They're fine. The model signs off on that. Borges, very offensive in terms of his production. He was 95% in both goals and assists, like 95% in key passes. So like in terms of offense creation, he was probably the best all-around player in the league. So you can make a case for your MVP to be whoever, but Tristan Borges definitely, in terms of offensive impact, one of the best players in the league. And I can't really turn my nose up at the MVP.
You can, because I went with Wojciechowski, so we were I went along the lines of your stats, Alex. We were right, they were wrong.
Yeah, so there you go, Mike. Now you can feel vindicated that it should have been Tobias Wojciechowski because you got the stats, the cold hard stats, to back you up on it. But then last in the top 5 in terms of top performers is maybe another surprise to some players, and maybe because of again being in defense, but it was Malik Oluwabi Belawu. Now, Alex, here at Coast to Coast, we love this player. We loved watching him, especially towards the start of the season. When there was that big Magikarp James size hole in Forge FC, he stepped into it, and even though he didn't get that much game time towards the end of the season, his start and his middle of the middle of the season were so good. Yeah, maybe he should have been playing. Maybe it would have been different. But he was such a good player, and yeah, looking at his stats, it's interesting because you see it. Obviously, as a defender, you would think it would be as maybe one-sided as an attacker is in terms of defensive and offensive and their holistic stats overall, but he actually has pretty good stats pretty much all around, including his ball distribution, 73.8, his touches and 78, his 1v1, I'm assuming that also works offensively and defensively, in 85.1. And then obviously his defensive stats, dual aerial percentage, 89.9, tackles and interceptions, 82.7, same as his blocks and clearances. So a very, very good defender, but also a good player in possession from what it looks like, and somebody that he can be reliable. And I mean, it's not really surprising, I guess, because when you look at Forge, they need players that are good on the ball and that are good in possession. But yeah, I'll tell you right now, Alex, this him being in the top 5 made us both very, very happy.
Well, I'm glad to hear it because, frankly, fullbacks get overlooked a lot. And as a former fullback, now center back, you really have to do a lot of things on the field. And you have to contribute offensively, but you also have to be very, very good defensively, because if you're non-existent on the wing, your center back's going to hate you. And that sort of well-rounded, ideal fullback means that if we're just weighting the numbers, you actually get shortchanged quite a bit. So the fullbacks get boosted a lot, which is something that I discovered early on. And I initially just ignored it. I was like, fullbacks get shortchanged. That's how it is. But then I fixed that. I was like, yeah, let's boost them up really high, because fullbacks need to get recognized. They do a lot of work that sometimes get ignored because maybe they get beaten once or twice, and then the opposition team will score, and you blame the fullback for giving that space up on the wing, and maybe they go up and they lose the ball because they did beat their man, and then you get flack either way. So a good fullback is well-rounded everywhere, and Malik Oluwabu-Beliwu was like, this is one of the best fullback cards I think I've seen since Miguel Acosta's 2022. He was really good that season as well, although he played mostly center back as well. But like Oluwabu-Beliwu, both of them really well-rounded, and it shows in his top 5.
Yeah, that ball distribution thing's quite good because, people might think if our defender just playing a sideways pass or getting it into the centre midfielder. But I think from watching the games though, and he was quite adventurous when he could be, and he would try those line breaking passes, and it wasn't just simple passes and just trying to not really affect the game but keep the ball. He got his head up and he looked and he was trying to break lines and trying to get things going. And for a young player just coming in, despite playing for Forge, I really liked him.
But now let's talk about, instead of just the straight up best performers, maybe let's look at some of the most consistent performers in the last few years, because again, it's not always just about the best players in the season, but who has been doing really well across the last few seasons. Now we're going to start with Diego Gutierrez, but before we dive into his actual stats, because I know you have this comparative stat here, how about you explain, Alex, a little bit what criteria you had for selecting these players?
So what I first did was I just looked at these seasons, the last 3 seasons, so 2022, 2023, 2024. And then what I did was I removed every player who had at least one season below 70. It's rather arbitrary, but that sort of eliminates the massive outlying seasons.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually a very small pool of people. There's a lot of turnover in the CPL. Around, I think, 50% of the league leaves at any given season. So in the last 3 years, only 59 players have played all 3 seasons, and only 12 have had seasons above 70. So the pool is very small here, and that's just natural given the just the mandate of the CPL to be a developmental league. So you've got lots of turnover. And then what I did was for those 12 remaining players, I ranked, or I looked at their standard deviation of their scores. So essentially how much they wiggle in either direction from their average of the last 3 seasons. And Diego Gutierrez was the most consistent player of the last 3 seasons. And that includes playing for Valor. So that's quite surprising, right? I liked him on Valor. I really wanted him for Atletico Ottawa. He went to Cavalry, unfortunately, but you can see he sort of does his job very, very well, and he can be relied upon.
Just looking at it, very, very reliable. I mean, for me, he was one of the most underrated players of the year last season, and I still maintain he's probably one of the most underrated players of the year this season. Just see how well he is just in terms of his numbers, and that it backs it up. I mean, you look at it, it barely deviates from his average whatsoever in the last 3 seasons. And you see how much that he does, not only as that kind of defensive midfielder destroyer, but also in possession and even popping up and getting more forward and scoring goals. It's no surprise to me, really, that Diego Gutierrez is the number one on this list. I know, Mike, if only he was still wearing a Valor shirt, I think you'd be a lot happier about this. But at least, two out of three seasons, he was with Valor, so it goes to show how important he was there. But before or after him, rather, we have Kyle Becker, who I think most people would have had this.
He's been all right.
Yeah, he's been okay, hasn't he? I've seen him a couple of times mentioned in the Player of the Year awards. Yeah, no surprise with Kyle Becker. I mean, looking at his grades by season, it's superb. From all the way 2019, 76.3, a little bit of a dip in 2020, but obviously 2020, do we really count it given what happened? 69.9, sorry, Halifax fans. 78.0 percentage in 2021. 2022 being his best year with 80.5 is maybe not a little bit surprising, given that I don't know. I feel like there are seasons that for me he was a little bit better, but interesting to see that was his highest season, and then tapered off a little bit in the last few seasons. But for a player of his age, he's 34 years old, to be playing at this consistent level, from when he came in at 28, 29 to now, only goes to show like he is the bar, I think, when it comes to top CPL players, and it's the fact that he's being able to play so consistently that that goes to show how much of a player he is. Because I'm sure you have the stats for this, Alex, but like he's a player that very rarely misses games due to injury and suspensions. He's one of the most consistent players in terms of just appearances as well, right?
Yeah, he plays almost every game, almost every season. Yeah, when you look at that 6-year stretch, that's like inconceivable. For one thing, he's stuck around the CPL, and you can talk about why till the cows come home. But he's stuck around, and he's playing very well, which is something you don't see very often. He's very consistent in his passing metrics. He's always contributing offensively. He's always super involved in play, and it's just incredible. Say what you want about Forge. It's incredible that they have someone like this at the heart of their team every single season.
Yeah, for sure. And it's so good that you had to break your rule a little bit, because you said you eliminated somebody who had a season under 70, and 2020 was 69.9. So I see that you had to just bend it a little bit to get him into this top 5 there.
I guess
but
that's from like his 2023 dipped a little bit from 2022, but that was because sort of 9 or 10 of the other Forge players weren't really playing, and he was having to carry them on his back for quite a while throughout the season.
That's very true. I remember that. Yeah. But then we have a cavalry player in third for this, and that's Charlie Trafford, who is, I know, Mike, you love Charlie Trafford.
Love it, Charlie Trafford.
You love that the duo that cavalry had before of Trafford and Daly. And
Gutierrez, as much as you would have loved him at Ottawa, that was a perfect fit in cavalry. He was a cavalry player.
Yeah, and looking at his stats, the weight percentage for his career, 73.8. He had his best season actually in 2024 with 77.2 compared to 2023, which was 72.1, and 2022, which was 74.0. Is the reason, Alex, why it was higher with 77.2 because of the minutes and what you were talking about before of playing a bit fewer minutes gives you a little bit more extremes?
That is possible, yes. Although it is possible that it is just like necessarily season to season, you won't always get the same distribution of stats in the league. So there's a little bit of variation in there. One thing I did notice is that he was a lot more involved this season. So last season, 2023, he was only around the 90th percentile in terms of touches. This year is 95th. So he really got involved in play. And in terms of the model, getting involved sort of makes you more important by consequence. So by playing more, by touching the ball more, you get a little boost in your grade. His strength, consistent. So the dual and the aerial win rate, very consistent in the low 90s. Is also a very good passer. So all those three things that a center defensive mid really needs to be good at, he was extremely good at. And of course, that involvement sort of boosts his grade up as well.
Yeah, that I think we can verify that from what we saw as well. That's he's a player that even if you had, Gutierrez and another player, maybe like Shimmy Chom, like we saw towards the end of the season, you can bring on a Charlie Trafford and he just does the things right. He's very physical, defensively he's good, in possession he's good. He can even be a threat off set pieces. So it's good to see that he's being recognized, or we're able to recognize him here with this comparison here.
Is it coincidence that his lowest score comes with the most attempted cartwheels?
You know what? I think there's a correlation there, Mike. I think there might be a correlation there. In fourth, we have Amir Didic. I mean, we already talked a lot about him, but look at that chart for our audio listeners. He only has, let alone 70s. He only has one season below 80. And that was again in 2020. Do we really count that? If we don't, then he doesn't. His lowest score is 82.0 in 2021, which is funny because of Pacific. But his first year that he came in, 88.4. His third year, 21, like I said, 82. Fourth year, 89.4. 2023, 89.4 again. So he just kept at that super high standard between 2022 and 2023 for Pacific. And then 2024 with Atletico, a little bit of a down in terms of 84.9, like you mentioned, Alex, there. I know it's funny calling it a little bit of a down when you're still, and one of the best players. Yeah, one of the top players in the league. But just... wow, what a player. Looking at his stats and everything, look at the minutes that he's played and his appearance as a player that's been there, since the very beginning of the league. It's fantastic to see that he's been able to play so well. And I mean, I'm sure for you, you're hoping that he gets back up to those 89s in 2025. But yeah, fantastic player. We won't spend too much more time talking about him since we have praised him quite a bit. So we'll talk instead about another defender, and that's TMG, Thomas Meyer-Guier for Pacific, because this is a player that I think a lot of fans, they do obviously respect, and they know that he's a good center back, but maybe he was a little bit overshadowed because of Didic that we just compared him to beforehand, playing so well that maybe players didn't, or not players, but people didn't realize how good he actually was, even regardless of Amir Didic starting beside him. And I think this year kind of showed that as well, even though it wasn't necessarily his best year. You look at the stats that he has, and in the last 3 seasons, 71.5, 76.9, 71.8. These are seasons that are still quite good for a center back. And I think that now that he doesn't have Amir Didic kind of to shadow him, and now he's seen as a top dog, that's what has allowed maybe people to clock in more, to see him be that kind of player. We don't know what the future will hold, obviously, for Thomas Meyer-Guier. There are rumors swirling about him right now, but on a whole, when you look at it, it's no surprise that he's one of the most consistent performers in the last few years, Alex.
Oh, for sure. I think some of the things, yes, being paired with Amir Didic maybe hides his flaws. He's a very, let's say, defensive center back. He focused a lot on being a strong player in the air and on the ground. He's good at blocking shots and clearing them. And maybe not the best going forwards. His passing isn't top notch, especially in the modern game where you want your center backs passing very, very well and passing a lot. Maybe not the most modern center back in the world. But, as a former Ottawa Fury, I have to shout out my boy, TMG. And for sure, I think his stock maybe will rise a bit more if he's given him maybe a more consistent partner in Pacific, or if he goes elsewhere. Honestly, I think he'd be a good transfer for anyone. Yes, please bring him home.
That would be the return of Didic and TMG in Ottawa. Get the band back together in Ottawa this time. That would be a heck of a move for Ottawa if that does come to be. But yeah, fantastic defender.
I do see what you say though. Well, sorry, jumping in with he's an old-fashioned defender, because you saw, Pacific like the 4th best defensive record in the league. 1 more goal conceded than Forge. So they were dealing with things, but then they obviously Ali and Dom getting injured ruined them. Getting the ball out of the back.
Yeah, for sure.
But now let's move on to, instead of talking about the most consistent performers in the last few years, let's talk about the most underrated performers from this season specifically. So again, Alex, I'll put the first player up, which was Elijah Adekugbe, but I'll let you speak about, again, your criteria for how you selected who was the most underrated performer.
So the first thing I did was I selected by minutes. I wanted at least 1,500. Usually my cutoff is around 800, but I wanted you to have a bulk sample size, really. I chose none that were in any of the writers' team of the seasons from a couple weeks ago. I selected these before the team of the season was out, so I was going by that. I made sure there was no representatives in the team of the seasons, and I also did, in addition to Adekugbe and one more, I chose one from every non-playoff team because I really wanted the representation from the other teams. You get a lot of Forge Cavalry hype in team of the seasons. Everyone sort of goes gaga over the best teams in the league, but no one really talks about teams like Valor, Vancouver, and Halifax, right? You kind of want to boost them up, and I made sure that there was some representation for those teams.
Yeah, I mean,
we do hype them, and maybe we do that too much.
Yeah, but now we have the numbers to represent it. That's the thing that we needed. Like, now we have the numbers to back why we love the underdogs. So we'll start with Elijah Adekugbe. I mean, a player that has been so good for York United. Also, a lovely human being overall. I got the chance to talk to him and meet him at the CPL final. But he's a player that he had to play center back at times for York United this season. You know, there was that one game where they had 3 center defensive mids as their 3 center backs because of their injury crisis that they have in defense. But looking at, you know, the stats that he has, you know, it's not really a surprise that he's one of the most underrated players when you have stats in front of you. But 99.4 in ball distribution just immediately jumps out. Is that the highest score in the league in that particular stat?
I think it might be. There might be a 100 in there from like a 100-minute, 200-minute player. And not all of the presenter ranks go up to 100 because of like the top dog might be tied with someone. So it
right.
a little bit lower. That's definitely one of the highest, certainly. And that's reflected in his pass accuracy. 89.8% of his passes, which is extremely, extremely high for this level. He passed a lot. He passed around 65 attempts in a game. Again, a lot, 98th percentile there. And his strength there. So the 3 categories really, which comprise a good center back or center defensive mid, in my model: passing, touches, and strength. And he really excelled in those 3 areas. So maybe he's not the most well-rounded player in the world, but in terms of a destroyer type, passing, center defensive mid, he is up there with the best in the league. And I'm surprised no one's talked about him because some of the other players here are ranked lower. But Adekugbe being this high and no one talking about him, I think is a travesty. And I'm not even a York fan. I'm a fan of their rival. I'm saying this, recognize this York player, please.
Yeah. No, agreed. And, you know, that's a lovely thing about this whole thing, right? Is that you can bring up the numbers to literally back up why we got to put some respect on this man's name. And as someone, you know, for us, we've talked about him. We've rated him very highly this season, especially because of his adaptability and how well he played. I mean, I got to see it personally when he got the Man of the Match award when York came to Vancouver and he had to play in center back and he just locked it down for York United. So, a fantastic player and good. Yeah, great to see that we can, you know, give him a little bit of the credit now, seeing as we're giving him the most underrated performer of the year award, I guess, by putting him first here. But yeah, he said some of the other players might be a little bit lower, but still quite good. So let's go into them. One of them being Tom Field from Cavalry. I'm guessing the only other player that is from a playoff team here, a fullback that we don't usually see start all that much. I think, you know, when you have Bradley Camden and Fraser Aird, like those are 2 quite good fullbacks. You don't really see him being able to jump into the squad all that much. But, you know, the stats show, as you see there, with ball distribution, 93.5, touches 92.9, and tackles and interceptions 94.6, that when he does play, he's not only good in defensively in terms of his tackles and stuff, but he's also good on the ball and you know, in terms of passing it around and keeping it going. I do love that he has 0.0 in goals and assists. Absolutely had nothing to do with the final production, just nada.
Not my
But
job. Not doing anything above the job description. I'm sticking to
it. He really said that 18-yard box, a mystery for me. That's for you guys. I'm not dealing with that whatsoever. But yeah, like he's a player that maybe not many people would associate. Hence why he is, one of the most underrated performers, because only 17.92 90 minutes completed. Only he barely made your cutoff of minutes played with only 1,613. So looking at his performance overall, you might say that when he did play, he made the most out of it.
Yeah, you could say it's again a sort of Ali Musi situation where he played less and he's got some of those extremes. But again, in the minutes he does play, he is very effective as a ball distributing fullback. And I think one thing you guys might have noticed, or that I keep saying about passing, I really, really value passing. And that's another thing as well. The weighting of the averages is inherently arbitrary. It's my decision, and it's basically my biases on what I want to see in a specific position or in terms of the game state overall. Passing is very, very important to me because I hate seeing players just spray it and lose it, and then it's so frustrating. So passing, if you're a good passer, you have a leg up on your peers there. Tom Field, very, very good passer. Passes a lot and completes them at a higher rate than everyone else. So that's maybe why his grade is so high, because his defensive stats, while his interceptions are really good, his sort of strength and his blocks and clearances are not the greatest. So the passing there is doing a lot of work. But like you said, off the bench, he's overshadowed by Fraser Aird quite a bit. I think Fraser Aird was in the team of the season for every single writer. So he takes a lot of that spotlight in terms of cavalry fullbacks, but Tom Field is definitely a solid player.
Yeah, and that makes sense because also for me, Fraser Aird was in my team of the season. Just I love he's one of my favorite players in the league. But it's good to see that they have depth and that they have a quality player like Tom Fields in their ranks, cavalry, and to be a championship side, you need everybody to be pulling in the same direction. You need to have quality off the bench, and Tom Field, good to see that he's when he does come on, he makes the most out of it. Going into Halifax territory, let's talk about who you had in third, which was Andre Rampersand here, the Trinidad and Tobago international, 78.2 in terms of his adjusted weighted percentile average, 97 in terms of his ball distribution is a fantastic stat. His other stats, he seems to be, again, by nature, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think by nature a midfielder is going to be more well-rounded than attackers and defensive across the stats. So no really bad stats for him across all regards. Obviously, his shooting is a little low, and his tackles and interceptions is a little low considering that he is usually a holding midfielder. But clearly, it's the ball distribution. His 1v1s, 81.5 is quite good. Foul differential of 83.9 is quite good. Even his aerial duels, he is quite good in the air. And we know that of 81.5. But it's a player that maybe isn't a destroyer like a Charlie Trafford that we were talking about. But on the ball, he seems to be very, very good and actually one of the best in terms of ball distribution.
Yes, I just realized I spelled his name wrong. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Mr. Rampersad, I will change that as soon as I get off the pod. But yes, in terms of center defensive mid, his passing is really good. That's valued quite highly in terms of his position. In terms of his tackles and interceptions, it's actually his tackle percentage that's really weighing that down. He completed only 47% of his tackles. So he's that's really quite poor, especially for a center defensive mid. But he makes up for that with almost 2 interceptions a game. So you got that trade-off there. I think the tackle percentage is weighted slightly higher, which is why his interceptions aren't quite reflected in that stat. But yeah, he's really quite well-rounded. I remember, I think a couple of seasons ago, Rampersad was touted as one of the best defensive players in the league. And then I think it was last season where the Halifax fans really turned on him. But I want to show that, he's aging like fine wine a little bit in there. He's still playing to a high standard, and I think he's obviously not quite talked about so much in the league circle. So I want to boost his name a little bit.
I guess like the mix, because obviously like you have to, it's hard to take into account styles of play and things like that when dealing with sort of the stats. Like Halifax are a little bit more back and forth throughout the throughout a 90 minutes. Like there's counter attack after counter attack after counter attack both ways. Whereas in some other games, a defensive midfielder might have a better tackling percentage because they are dealing with things at maybe a slower pace. Whereas like a Halifax central midfielder is doing a lot of back and forth.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point, especially with how it was this season.
Yeah,
for the Halifax,
maybe with 9 or 10 men on the pitch.
So, yeah, exactly. Probably had to pull his weight a little bit more in terms of that regard. But yeah, nice to see again to be able to reward him, and I feel like the tide has shifted from what I've seen. That people are coming back around to him now this season.
It's
really
Jay
Rapper said,
yeah, like really
yeah.
good.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it was really good to see his name come up. Well, yeah, I was really impressed with him this year from just eye test wise, like just for watching the matches. Really,
exactly.
Glad for it.
Exactly. So it's always nice to be able to recognize. Same with this next player here. I know for personally as well for myself, Rocco Romeo is the fourth player that you chose for this. 73.4 adjusted weighted percentile average. And you see that maybe not the best in terms of some stats, but in terms of blocks and clearances, 94.6 is quite high. And exactly, that's why I was going to say, it's like, it's no surprise that he is in the top one, because that feels like that's all he was doing defensively, was just trying his best to clear balls and to block shots. And the fact that he had 94.6, and yet Callum Irving still broke the CPL record for more saves in the season, shows that it could have been even more if it wasn't for Rocco trying to do his best to block the goals. And admittedly, I think he did contribute a little bit to the mistakes that happened throughout the season. I do think that Rocco is a player that needs a more experienced center back beside him to help him out, to help kind of reach those heights, because he does have, I think, the attributes to be a top CPL center back. It's just, when you are 24 and you're seen as the leader of the back line, it's a little bit daunting, especially since that wasn't his case before when he was in other CPL teams. But yeah, like 94.6 block and clearances, it's not really that it's not really what you maybe want to see in terms of if you're a fan, in the same way as you don't want to see Callum Irving have that many saves. But it's good to see, again, the recognition rather, Rocco Romeo, because I know that the Vancouver FC fans absolutely adore him. He's so good with the fans. He's so involved with them. So I'm a big fan personally of him, and I love the little radar chart that you have there. I wonder what that big point is.
Yeah, he's one of those, especially it's hard to say on bad teams, right? As a defender, that's all you're doing, right? Is you're clearing the chances, you're blocking shots, and you don't really have opportunity to do anything else. But yeah, I've liked Rocco Romeo for a long time, and like you mentioned, I've always wanted to see him alongside someone who's a little more stable, who can make up for some of Rocco Romeo's maybe not weaknesses, but not strengths. For example, his passing isn't the greatest. But yeah, Rocco Romeo, I've liked him for a long time. Like most good players in this league, I've wanted him on Ottawa, and I haven't got my wish granted for me. So this is just a way to show my love for Rocco Romeo.
Yeah, that's very fair. Yeah, he's a very, very important piece for Vancouver FC, and hopefully, if he does get, I know that's one thing they're targeting, is to get a more experienced center back alongside him. We'll see his, adjusted weighted percentile average get boosted in 2025 with a bit of a better partner. But let's finish off with this section with a Valor player for you, Mike. Roberto Alarcon here with a weighted percentile average of 73. Again, ball distribution 90.5, a very, very high stat. 81.5 in terms of blocking clearances as well, probably similar for the same reasons as why Rocco Romeo was high up on that one. But what was it about Alarcon, Alex, that made you choose him for this list? Because, was it because everyone was talking about, because I know that's what we were talking about, how good Temi Antonoglu was, that people were maybe forgetting that Alarcon was doing quite well for Valor as well?
That's almost exactly my reasoning. I figured everyone was talking about Temi, and I wanted to show that not everything is him, especially along that back line. Like you didn't mention, those blocks are ridiculous. I think he was blocking almost a shot a game, which for a fullback is not good, because why are you there in the first place?
Very true. Very true.
And his passing is also quite amazing, 88%, I believe. So those two strengths there really show that he was quite involved in the play. And yes, he was overshadowed by Antonoglu quite a bit. I think I didn't see a single variation in the left back position in the team in the seasons. It was all Temi. And I was like, hey, maybe there are other players on Valor that require shadow. And you might have noticed a lot of these players are defensive, because no one talks about defenders at all. They're all like, oh, winger. No, there are fullbacks and center backs who exist and deserve praise as well.
Yeah.
I thought he was a really good, desperate for Valor to get a playoff spot. So they became my team this year when they signed Alarcon. His time at Cavalry before that, they've got Fraser Ed, so it made it's quite difficult for them to duking it out. I don't think, when I look at the two of those players, I don't think Alarcon's a much worse player than Fraser Ed. I don't think he's. I thought it was a really shrewd pickup for Valor as a player. He's someone that can get forward and can get involved in games, like you say, with the ball distribution. It's not just he did the sensible things which Valor needed to do at times, but when he was at Cavalry, especially, he was getting forward and he was trying to do things as well. It's great to see. Great to see him, just for the fact of his years here, in Valor and Cavalry. I think he's been a really good fullback in this league.
Yeah, for sure. And we never know with Valor what their turnover is going to be like, but hopefully he sticks around for next season for you guys, because without Temi, you're going to need a little bit more from him next season, especially in terms of maybe ball distribution and key passes.
Yeah, well, there'll be a new left back, Debris and Temi. Who's the next one?
Yeah, who's the next one? That's the real question. But now let's move on to the last list that we have here, especially since we're getting deep into this and it's getting a little longer in the episode. Well, let's talk about the breakout stars from this season. And I know, Alex, that you also had some comparisons that you have to some of these players. So we're going to start with Jay Herdman, but really quickly, Alex, what was your criteria for selecting breakout stars?
So we're looking at players 22 years of age or less, and I really had to lower my standards for minutes. So you can see Herdman here at 401 minutes. That was at my cutoff, 400 minutes, because I usually try to get 800 to 1,000, but young players don't get the opportunities. So you really have to go down into, lower your standards, if you will. And that's why you see so many extremes when you look at these players. According to the stats, Herdman was the 13th best player in the league. Obviously, it wasn't, right? But rate-wise, he was extremely, extremely good. In the 401 minutes he played, he was very good. He was getting assists, getting goals, passing a lot. So that's why you'll see a lot of extremes here, and don't overreact to the extremes. Just take it as a generality until they start playing more and start backing that up with more minutes.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I'm looking at it right now, and it seems that only of all of the this is under 21, but in terms of on the under 21, because I'm looking at the CPL minutes, only 7 players had over 1,000. So it's no surprise, I guess, that you had to lower your kind of standard a bit in that regard. But yeah, I know for myself, I'm also biased because I'm from Vancouver, and Jay Herdman was playing for WFC2, the Whitecaps second team, but he's been fantastic since he came into Cavalry. The fact that even though he came in quite late in the season, he started the CPL final, almost scored in the CPL final. It was very, very lively in that dominant opening half hour. It goes to show how much of a quality player he is. And when you look at his stats, 90.5 in goals and assists, 94 in shooting. Obviously, it's a relatively small sample size, so maybe you take this with a grain of salt. But you could also see it as in this short time that he has been able to play, he's been quite good, and that's the reason why he's been able to start a CPL game, a CPL final, and that's the stats sort of back up why Tommy chose him to start on that left side ahead of Forge in that big game.
Mm-hmm. He slotted in, didn't he, and looked like when you're saying like an impact player, like he slotted in as if like, oh, okay, that's that missing piece in that front four with Camargo, Musi, and Wojewski, get him in perfect. Like it really did seem to work.
Yeah, and it was interesting because it's a different kind of profile than we've seen from Cavalry on the left side from before, because you had obviously Eustaquio, who was there at the start of the season before his big injury. Before there, you had Gauthier and Tigny as well, right? So it's interesting to see how Herdman kind of came in as a different profile overall from I guess the kind of player that we typically see from the Cavalry front line. Next, we have the breakout star of the season. I think it's fair to say, Alex, in Shola Jimo, the exciting 16-year-old. I can't not believe it. 16-year-old wide midfielder from York United. You look at again, barely 600 minutes. 598 minutes. He only completed 6.64 90s. He did play in 16 games, so it goes to show that he was used quite a bit off the bench. But you look at those stats. I mean, the radar graph is quite funny in that stark lineup when you go to goals and assists and 99.4, 97.6 in shooting, and some of the other stats maybe not that great because again he doesn't really maybe get that many touches on the ball is what I'm assuming why he's quite low in terms of touches and ball distribution. But 67.9 key passes for the role that he's in is quite good from a player of his role,
and for the age especially 16. That's a child. So the fact he's doing this in a men's professional division is really, really exciting. And yes, you mentioned the reason his average is maybe is a little lower. His passing isn't the greatest, although that doesn't necessarily matter as a winger. The crossing and the 1v1%, you're not gonna. If you want to have a higher average, you as a winger get those up a little bit more. But yes, he is extremely dangerous as a young player. I think he scored twice against Ottawa, which is just insulting. And frankly, you want to say he's 16 years old. Like, can you really project a 16-year-old? I'm not sure. He's really, really exciting. I'd probably pump the brakes until he grows a mustache and puts on some body weight and then really figures out how he's going to play as an adult.
Yeah, that's a great point.
He was given that chance. Sorry, like you say with the 1v1s, it was like just go at him. Like it wasn't pick your time. It was just go. Like it's like whether it works or not, just do it. It's every time you get the ball, go try. So like some players are given that sort of mandate to just run at players rather than pick their times. Maybe I guess.
Yeah. And I think, with such a small sample size and such a young player, he's going to be able to grow into it more. And maybe, he will take the time to work on his 1v1s and his passing a little bit more as he gets older. Because, like you said, he's 16 years old. He's still in high school. I'll tell you what, I wasn't doing in high school, playing in a men's professional soccer league. So I don't think we are ones to really, be able to critique him that much. But I did want to compare him to last year's breakout star in terms of TJ Tahid, because he was also the same thing. He was a breakout star at 16 years old, came in to Vancouver FC, made a huge impact, and was touted as the next big thing. Now, looking at this comparative chart that you have here, Alex, you look at the adjusted weighted percentile average between the two. And even though Tahid made a big impact in terms of the eye test, in terms of the story, his percentile average doesn't actually reflect that he had that much or that great of a season, considering that he played more games, although less minutes, than Shola Jimo when you compare the stats.
Yeah, so one thing you'll get again in these small sample sizes is lots of extremes, and your extremes have to be extreme to compensate for the lower extremes, right? His passing was better than 3% of the league at ball distribution, right? And only 500 minutes, right? But his goals and assists and his shooting weren't in the high 90s like Gmo's was. So you really get punished in those lower minutes if your extremes aren't extreming. And again, playing less than average is going to get your number decreased in terms of adjusted average. But yeah, I think they looked like the exact same player, basically attack first, exciting, dynamic winger. Gmo was just slightly better in like almost every category that matters as a winger. And that means that their scores were very quite there's a lot of difference there, even though technically they were basically the same player.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I had asked you if we could compare the two, because they do remind me of a similar mold between the two of them. There's a being wingers, young, exciting, dynamic, the age, the story, and everything. So yeah, it's really interesting to look at the stats between them. 3 from passing from TJ is so harsh, but it's like you mentioned, it has to do with the extremes of such a small sample size. But yeah, you get to see how Gimo is, started so well for York United, and because they're both so young, we have no idea where they're going to go. But as for people who are Canadian fans and want to be, repping the future of Canada, these are two really good candidates for maybe future men's national team players. And it's nice to see their humble beginnings at 16 years old in the CPL, and we get to see some of the stats here between the two of them. But let's go now to another Ottawa boy for Alex, yourself, in Tier Walker. Comparing him, obviously, last year, he was a player that we talked about a lot in terms of how well he stepped up for Ottawa, being such a young player. He was very, very solid in Atletico Ottawa's defense, even when they started to go a bit off the rails towards the end of the season. This season, it seems that he's sort of continued that trend, even though there's been this influx of quality. He still has been one of the sort of like top young performers in the league.
For sure. I don't want to sort of run away from myself here as an Ottawa fan, so I'll simmer down a little bit on my hype of Joe Walker. But these are very, very good numbers for a young player, especially as a defender who usually matures later. This is very, very good. I was writing an article about him today, actually, and I mentioned that this sort of base, his fundamentals for a young center back are pristine. There are no weaknesses that I don't want to see, essentially. So the fact that he played in more minutes this season alongside Didic clearly had a massive effect on his development, and I'm very, very excited to see him playing more going forwards. And I especially think that no one aside from you guys, obviously, weren't really talking about him at all, and this season either. I think he was one of the best young players in the league this season, but of course he's a defender, so no one talks about them, and it falls on to me to boost that agenda in terms of young defensive players.
He was one, like you say. We get, as the season goes on, we take a look at those U21 minutes quite a lot and see who's struggling with them. And Ottawa, like he was last season, he was making up a lot of those numbers, and he was starting to get in. And he was one of those ones where you didn't look at him and go, well, he's there for the minutes. You looked at him thinking, okay, there's a player.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you look at the stats. I mean, his weighted percentile average of 68.6 is still quite good. 90.5 in terms of 1v1 percentage, 91.7 in terms of tackle and interceptions, 86.9 in terms of blocks and clearances, 83.3 in terms of dual and aerial percentage. I mean, these are stats that you would attribute to like the upper standard of a defender in the CPL. And the fact that these are what is reflecting a player that has played a decent chunk of minutes, 1,350 odd minutes, 18 games. He's had 15 ish 90s. Like, this is a player that it's not like other players where like the small sample size boosts them up as much. These are still like decent stats after playing a decent amount of time. So yeah, I think you're right, Alex, in saying that Tier is a player that's he could have easily been in that underrated list that we did earlier in the episode.
Yeah,
because
definitely.
of how solid he's been. The fact he's only 21 too makes it that's it's super exciting. I know how keen you'll be to make sure that he stays on through his young career. It'll be unfortunately a matter of when and not if he moves on to bigger and better things if he continues this good form. But speaking of defenders, we're going to move on to a Pacific defender here to finish off in Christian Greco-Taylor, who is, again, a player that came in to this Pacific side, a little bit of bias too, from the Vancouver Whitecaps FC2 side. And those in Vancouver know how good of a player he is. He's a good defensive fullback, a bit more of a traditional fullback. He's not one that likes to fly forward and contribute necessarily to the attack. And some of the stats might represent that, though. If you look at it, 60.5 weighted percentile average is quite an average stat for your explanation, Alex. But he has 76.8 in terms of key passes, which I'm assuming is coming from the crosses that he did, because we did talk about how good he's been so far for Pacific in terms of being able to cross the ball into dangerous areas. And then you look at his defensive stats: 81.5 in tackles, 79.2 in duels and aerial percentages. These are still quite decent stats for a player that's only played 1,000 minutes.
Oh, for sure. And especially considering his age, the fact that he was winning almost 2/3 of his ground duels is quite impressive, considering he's probably going to be a little lighter, a little unsure about his body, especially playing against men. That dual percent win rate is something that stood out to me as a young player. Interceptions as well, around 1.5 per nine. That's quite good. His stats, like in terms of the grade he got, they're not the greatest, but his overall stats for a young player are quite impressive. Like Tier, he's got a good base for a young defender. He just needs to, like, if he improves all of those stats that he's good at, he'll become very, very solid as a fullback.
Yeah, no, I think that's. I know, Mike, that you're someone that was a big fan of him when he came in, and the job that he was able to do at the fullback, because at that fullback position, especially considering that we were talking about the lack of depth that Pacific had at fullback. He kind of stepped in and did quite a good job for Pacific and the opportunities that he had at 19 years old.
Yeah, injuries, issues with going forward, giving the ball away, change of style and things like that. When he didn't exactly come into the most stable of teams, and yeah, to do that at 19 was it was really impressive. Like, it was someone who I hadn't seen at Vancouver in the Whitecaps too. So I was interested to see where it went. But yeah, like, came in there with a lot of, like you say, like a lot of confidence to go in there and do that as a 19-year-old.
Yeah, exactly. And, as a last comparison here, we're going to compare him to another young fullback from Vancouver originally, in James Cameron, and talk about his sort of breakout season from last year and comparing them between each other. And Cameron had, a bit of a lower weighted percentile average of 56, even though he played more games and 500 more minutes than Christian Greco-Taylor. You see that, again, maybe you look at some of the stats that matter more in terms of strength and tackles and defending. We got to remember that James Cameron originally was a winger that was sort of put into a fullback, and I think the stats sort of represent that. You see that his best stats of last season was dribbling, with 76.3. Quite average in terms of trans creation, which I'm surprised about, with 45.5. But between the two, Alex, when you look at Christian Greco-Taylor and James Cameron, I mean, if you were to look for a young fullback to play for your team, which one of the two would you choose based on what you've seen?
Well, it's hard to say because, like you said, Cameron was a winger, right? He's sort of a makeshift fullback and maybe hasn't grown into it as much. But I would probably choose Greco Taylor. When I look at the stats for James Cameron last year and for this year, I'm not the most impressed. Just look at the stats. I can't watch all the games, right? But just look at the stats. It doesn't look to me like a player who is getting call-ups to the national team. And maybe I'm missing something. Maybe my stats aren't complete, right? But I think in terms of right now, I would probably choose Greco Taylor because he's more of a typical conventional fullback that I would want on my team. And as a defender hugger, I want solidity and stability in the back, and I think Greco Taylor provides that over James Cameron.
Eye test wise as well. I mean, James, like you say, Christian Greco Taylor's a little bit more reserved. James Cameron looks like he can run sort of 2 or 3 marathons a week. Like he is up and down, and that's what you see. And you notice him more maybe on the pitch than you would Christian Greco Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that again, that plays into the difference between eye test and stats. So again, nice to see the comparison between the two and the strengths and the weaknesses that each have. Both are going to be good fullbacks and for the respective teams as they grow and they continue to develop, if it's at the CPL or otherwise. But yeah, it's cool to see how we can compare the two fullbacks in their sort of breakout seasons. But now that's the end of all of the player cards. Thank you so much for sticking around. I know it's been a bit of a long one. But before we wrap up, I want to give Alex an opportunity because he's brought along 3, I believe, fun stats that he's gotten from his scouring of data for these things. So if you want, Alex, I'll give the reins to you. You can go ahead and just zip off the 3 fun stats. We'll react a little bit, and then we'll wrap up.
So the first one here, I noticed that Caligari, right? He's always been a really good passer, high volume too. So I noticed this season that despite having the most pass attempts in the entire league, he still has the 4th highest accuracy. And normally, quantity and quality don't always go together, right? If you're passing in bulk, you might be spraying things a bit. To have such a high output and a high accuracy is extremely impressive. And the other thing I noticed was that he was the highest position on the field as a center mid to have anywhere close to that level of accuracy up until the 23rd ranked player. And everything in between was mostly center backs and center defensive mids who are playing sideways passes back to their goalies, stuff like that. So Caligari, on top of being a high quality, high quantity passer, is also doing it in a lot more congested areas and is spraying it to more offensive areas. So that's quite impressive to me.
Yeah. I mean, we who doesn't love Caligari? Like every time you watch, he just what did we say when we talked about him last season? He's just like he's a sexy player. Like every time you want to pair him with fine wine and fancy cheese, he's just that kind of graceful midfielder. And yeah, his quality is honestly on the ball and the way that he picks a pass and everything. He keeps it ticking. Probably second to none in the league. Honestly, one of the best players in that regard. So, yeah, no surprise with that fun stat there.
So my second stat, I was looking at the foul differentials, which, as a reminder, is if it's positive, you're drawing more. If it's negative, you're conceding more fouls. And one thing, just a fun thing I noticed is that more people are in negative foul trouble than positive, which means more people are giving away fouls than receiving them. I think this has something to do with wingers are always attacking whoever, and there's more people that have to stop them than attacking. That's just my theory. I haven't really thought that one out yet. My fun stat, though, was that Massimo Ferrin was one of the highest foul differential players in the league. He draws almost half a foul more than the next person with as many minutes as him. And the next closest after that is 0.03. So Ferrin is like up and away the best foul drawer in the league by a long shot.
Wow.
I mean, because he's a key part, and he sort of finds those little areas of space for those key passes and maybe those lofted balls from Nimic or Caligari, and then he's on, and it's bring him down or win the ball. You've got to stick a foot in. You can't let him go because if he gets the chance, he's got a great finish on him. So I guess, players must have that sort of direction from their coaches of if Ferrin gets the ball, get it as quickly as possible, we'll get him.
Yeah. And it does feel like that when you see the way they play. Is he's so dynamic, he's so forward facing that like you don't get him, he's gonna scamper away. You gotta get him down one way or the other. So pretty cool to see that he's in that kind of upper echelon in terms of the foul differential.
And the final stat I have here is about the chances created or key passes. And I was looking at fullbacks. A lot of fullbacks, some of them are just cross merchants, which actually the two I mentioned here are cross merchants. Fraser Aird had 2.6 key passes per 90, so 2.5 per game approximately. The next defender, anywhere close to him, only had 1.7. That was Danny Moore. So Fraser Aird was just lobbing crosses in, like just ad nauseum, just over and over again, and it just showed in his output in terms of chances created. And by the way, Moore, that's the next one at his sort of rank, but only played around half the minutes. So Fraser Aird is getting the minutes and he's getting the output. So that's why maybe he was the right back in the team this season. I'm not going to dismiss Fraser Aird as a cross merchant, but I'm just saying maybe he deserved it.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's exactly why I love him. He's basically the CPL David Beckham, from that right side, just crossing it into the box. I absolutely love that. And yeah, the fact that he had 2.6 key passes and he played double of what the Morer did in second, and Morer was only 1.7, shows that man just loves to spam crosses into the box. And the good thing is that he doesn't do it just errantly. Like he gets them in really good areas and to really good positions for the players.
Cavalry are set up so well for that though as well, aren't they, with their strike? Like you've got those three attacking players across the pitch who can cut inside and do dangerous things, but if they run into trouble, you've either got Wojciechowski, Shaw, Lowell Wright. They're all big targets in the middle.
Exactly. So that's probably why he has so much fun on that right side. And I hope to see more of that into 2025. But that is it for this week. That is it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening to this mega episode that we have here with Alex, with so many stats, with so many fun things to look into, so many insights to gather. It's no surprise that we had to go for so long, but thank you so much, Alex, for coming on and being able to share your graphs with us and be able to explain your sort of methodology and everything. It was super, super cool, super insightful. I know, especially for myself, as someone that also is just adores stats. Before we wrap up, how about you let the people know where they can find you and the work that you're working on right now?
So my main social media account where I publish all these stats is at CPL Numbers, and I'm mostly transitioning to Blue Sky. Now I'm jettisoning off Twitter, so Blue Sky at CPL Numbers is my main account. I also write articles for CCSG, and you can see that we publish those every couple of weeks or so. So my stats are published on CPL Numbers, and my articles, which have some of the stats in there as well, published for CCSG.
Amazing. Go check them out, because like I said, if you love stats, if you want to read more into it, and pretty sure also on CCSG you have a more like in-depth breakdown on how you do your stats and everything. If you really want to kind of dig in to what Alex's work is in terms of stats, follow him and follow his work on CCSG as well, because it's a lot of fun, and you can definitely spend hours doing a deep dive on that in terms of all the stats. It becomes a rabbit hole, as I know from personal experience. But that is it. Thank you so much. If you have any interesting tidbits based on this episode, let us know. We would love to be able to reply to you. But until next time, I'm Felipe Vallejo.
I'm Mike Rice.
And I'm Alex Rymek.
And this has been Coast to Coast FC, signing out.